19th. Thank you, Steve. 2022 Pollution Space and Aquifer Committee meeting. We have a host of us here at the University of Idaho and several folks here online with us as well. So just want to welcome everybody today. We'll go ahead and start off with introductions, and I'll open it up first to the online world. Let's start with Steve Robichon.
Steve Robichon, PBAC.
John Bush, you want to give a quick introduction?
John Bush, retired geology professor from the University of Idaho.
Glad to have you here today. John's going to be giving a presentation here in a bit. I see David.
Yeah, Dave Dalby, Viola resident.
Okay, thanks for joining us today, David. Sean
Coates, City of Pullman, and PBAC member.
I see Paul Kimmel just joined us from his office.
Madam Chair, Paul Kimmel, Latah County representative.
All right. We have Colt.
Colt Shelton, JUB Engineers.
All right. Welcome today, Colt. I have Pamela.
Pamela Tidorenko, community member.
Okay. Nice to see you today, Pamela. Perrin.
Hi there.
Oops. Just want to give a quick introduction of who you're with, Perrin.
You bet. Sure. Oh, okay. I just didn't realize that was the second one. Yes, Perrin Robinson with Jacobs Engineering Group, and we are a subconsultant to Alta.
All right. Perfect. Let's see. I'm trying to make sure I didn't miss anyone in virtual world. Okay. We're going to go around the room here in person. Let's start with Brian.
Brian Johnson with the University of Idaho.
Okay. My name is Kara Haley, current PBAC chair, but work for the city of Pullman as the city engineer.
Eileen McCall, PBAC member and Pullman City Council.
Mark Story, Whitman County Public Works. Jeff Lanigan, WC representative from facilities.
All right, let's go to Robin.
All right, Robin Nimmer, Alta Science and Engineering.
Great. Oh, and I missed you over here.
Jean Elliott, community member.
Okay, Jean.
David Hall, Latah County aquifer activist and member of the strategic group from PBAC, whatever, stakeholder group.
Stakeholder engagement group. Great. Welcome.
John Mark Mankey, interested community member.
All right, nice to have you today, John. Nice to have everyone here today. With that, we'll go ahead and make sure I don't have anyone else new online. It doesn't look like it. We'll go ahead and move into our agenda item number 2, approval of meeting minutes for April 21st, 2022. I'm hoping that folks have had a chance to look over that and would welcome a motion to approve those or discussion to change.
I'll move to
Make that motion.
Oh,
second.
Paul.
Okay, Paul made the motion. Brian has seconded that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, I don't see any opposed. We did just have Rusty join us, also from University of Idaho, and looks like I see Nathan Weller, City of Pullman council member, also joined on the line. So thanks everybody for joining us. All right, let's actually move on to item number 3, public comment for items not on the agenda. And I will open that up to the public and anyone in-house as well. Okay, I don't think I'm seeing any. I do see that Tom Handy has joined us. Thanks for joining us today, Tom.
Welcome.
Yes, with Whitman County. Let's go ahead and move on to presentations and discussion. So I'm very pleased today. We had an introduction from John Bush a little bit earlier, but I'm very pleased today to announce that we have John Bush here with us remotely. The last few months we've been talking about the importance of looking at what's considered the boundary of the pollution space and aquifer. Mr. Bush, as well as Steve, Mr. Bush's wife as well, put a lot of energy and efforts into preparing this presentation, as well as putting together somewhat of a proposal or a write-up to go along with it. Steve sent that out to the group after the last meeting. He also attached it to the email on Monday that came out with the agenda and the minutes. So I just want to thank you guys again for all your efforts on that. I know I'm very excited to hear what you guys have to say, and so thank you, and I'll pass it off to John.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks to the PBAC committee for taking time to listen to my talk. The photograph in front of you is Mark Story would know it very well, but the rest of you may not. It's over in near Elberton and about 8.5 miles northeast of Colfax. And it's one of the few places you can get a look at some of the Grand Ronde flows. The outcrop in the lower bottom, right along the Palouse River, this is taken at low water. That's the same flow that occurs in the upper part of the Grand Ronde, the very top of the Grand Ronde in Pullman. It is about the same elevation there as it is in Pullman, but it drops 240 feet by the time it gets to Colfax. So the Palouse River is flowing right down the tip of that rock. Before I go on, I want to particularly thank Steve Robuchon for helping me find information, questioning a lot of my ideas, which is good, and for Pamela Dunlap for doing, oh boy, checking all the references, checking all my data, and which is always fun between husband and wife, you know, to have somebody go over your stuff. But without those two, I wouldn't have finished. Let's go on to the next slide. Whoops. There we go. It's an outline of what I want to say or what I want to cover. Very few short comments to remind us on the history of the name of the Palouse Basin. The present map extent will make a couple comments about where there's some minor errors and lead into where I think a major change should be made. Talk about the basis for the proposed map extent, the importance of structural blocks. Going to diverge for a little bit on a little bit of geology and talk about what I mean by structural blocks. I think they're pretty important in the Palouse Basin area. And then we'll focus some comments on the Moscow Pullman area, cities of Palouse, Colfax, and the Union Flat Creek area, and then end with a couple conclusions. This is hopefully a brief summary of the paper that we sent out. Okay, history of the name, find it interesting. Back in the mid-1990s is when the committee changed their name. I think it was called Pullman Moscow Aquifer Committee, and it was changed to the Palouse Basin Aquifer Committee. In the early 2000s, Frida Leak did a tremendous amount of work for PBAC. I did one white paper, and then Steve Robuchon, when he came aboard, started to use the map or adjust the map. Anyways, there was input from the comments from experts, and but there was the thing that was interesting was I didn't think I had played any part in it, nor did I think Steve. But when I looked at all the theses that followed from 2007 to 2013, almost all the theses, reports, and publications used the term Palouse Basin, and they cited either Leak, Bush, or Robuchon. So I guess the three of us are responsible for that map. It's interesting, in 2013 to 2022, most of the publications and reports begin to drop that name. I don't know about the water publications, the hydrology publications. In my case, when I sent them out for peer review, the term Palouse Basin is sort of ambiguous because the basin means a lot of things, and it's not defined or accepted anywhere in the literature as a groundwater basin. So a lot of you'll see a lot of the new pubs that come out of PBAC, for example, last, oh boy, I think something like 10 publications have come out, PBAC theses and other work in the last 6 or 7 years. And I don't think any of them start off in their title with the Palouse Basin. Anyway, that's a little bit of history. Let's see, find the right buttons here. Okay, look at the present extent. Everybody's seen the red outline. I just want to point to a couple small changes, and then we'll talk about the larger Colfax area. If you look at the arrow down by Tumor Butte, down the lower right of the diagram, that line needs to be moved to the east. It's right now the way it is there. It includes what's actually called the Tummer Butte Water District. It's way over into the granites and schist. The ridge that separates the Columbia River basalts, or what we might call the Palouse Basin, from the east is actually right at the Elks Club. Those familiar when you're playing golf at the Elks Club, on the west side, it's down on the basalts, but you hit a long drive up into the hill and you're on basement rocks, granites, quartzites, and they're impermeable. So the boundary just needs moved in there to change that a little bit.
Hey, Steve, this is Paul. Is that Buffalo Hump? Is that what we call it?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
Buffalo Hump. You must, no offense to your longevity, but I didn't know anybody still used that name. That's what
Oh,
I
yeah.
always called it.
Yeah.
Yes. Buffalo Jump is the line. Because everything on the east of that, even if it's in basalts, is going to flow a totally different aquifer system. You go north, you see the other arrow pointing to a funny looking triangle or funny looking right angle bend. I don't know how I left that happen, or any of us left it happen. You can barely see it, but right at the arrow, you can see Highway 95 going north from Potlatch Junction north. That's where the line should be moved to. Highway 95 is pretty close to the contact between Columbia River basalts on the west and much older basalts that don't have the same hydrological characteristics on the east. We've actually had several calls the last couple of years. Potlatch and Harvard, Princeton are not in the same aquifer system. They're in older basalts, and so that line just needs to be moved over there and adjusted. And the other arrow I have is up there at Garfield. PBAC supported several theses at major pump tests in all 2008, 2009 by 3 students under Jim Lisinski, and those were all monitored. Garland was monitored and thought to be in the same system, but no evidence from the pump test that the water there was affected. It's an upper aquifer well, even though it encountered some lower aquifer rocks. So Garfield should be taken out of the system, I think. Now we go to the large area by the Hatchers, and that's what I'm going to talk about the most today, because that's a pretty big chunk of what we call the Palouse Basin. And the slides we were just asking about, if you look at the 1, 2, 3 Hatcher line in, you'll see a real sharp bend in the Palouse River. And that's right at Alberton. The Palouse River comes out of the Palouse area, makes a sharp bend to the southwest, and flows about 8.5 miles down towards Koufax. So we'll come back and talk in that area a little bit more. So our boundaries, this one would show the corrections, the small corrections that I talked about, plus leaving off the Koufax area almost entirely. And that's probably the most debatable area. And we'll like I said, we'll focus on that 2 or 3 times. The basis that we used was that, first of all, we did not include the upper aquifer. The Moscow Pullman pumping centers are taking the water primarily from the lower aquifer, almost entirely from the lower aquifer now. The new domestic wells drilled in Whitman County, particularly in the Moscow Pullman area, are all down in the lower aquifer. So I chose to move out the upper aquifer because its connection to the lower aquifer is very minimal, and it was a lot easier to decide where is it that the Moscow Pullman pumping centers can affect, or some areas that could affect the Moscow Pullman area. And of course, as we drew the lines, what we did, what makes it easy, is that the lower aquifer wells all have about the same water level. So if you have the same water level, we assume there's a connection. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the connection is big or little. It doesn't tell you the amount of the connection. But if you have 2 wells that are have the same level year after year, you're pretty sure they're connected in some manner. And for example, our entire area that I've circled there is all those have lower aquifer wells that have similar water levels. Now we get down to, once we put the lines on, we looked at anything hydrological and geological that we could. And there's an amazing amount of literature, by the way. I used to sort of skim through the hydrological stuff, but from 2007 to the present time, PBAC has supported a lot of work. It would actually, since I have a hard time reading the hydrological ones, but just sitting down and reading things I put out, some geological reports, the well logs, the new data, it would take you about 3 weeks to read. So you have put out a lot of information, a lot of referee journals, referee publications have come out of that work also. Both universities should be happy with the fact that their name is out there on those referee publications. Now, let's talk a second about what I call the importance of the structural blocks. Like, where is the water, first of all? And then how does that relate to what I call structural blocks? Structural blocks are like some area that has the same structural features, such as if it's all horizontal rocks or all horizontal layers, that could be called a structural block. If you have some area where the rocks dip or slope or tilt in one direction over a large area, you can call that a structural block. So taking the structural blocks, where's the water, and look at two principles, and I'll talk about where the water is. Two principles of the solid hydrology. There's lots of principles, but these are principles that have been used across the Columbia River Plateau, over the entire plateau, not just Moscow and Pullman. First of all, the water collects in the interflow zone. The interflow zone is the contact between two flows, where one flow sits on top of another. And then the other principle is water moves down the slope of the interflow. So a couple diagrams to illustrate that. This is a drawing showing, trying to show 5 different basalt flows. Let's just assume they're 100 feet thick, stacked on top of each other. And the blue course shows where the water is. That's in the interflow zone. Almost every basalt flow has different columns, different column configuration. But the interesting thing water-wise is that the centers rarely have much water. The centers are dense, and the tops and the bottoms where the fractures are, and that's where the water collects. Going back to my experienced drillers, by the way, I've known this for about 7 or 8 decades. When you drill down for a domestic well or a municipal well, if they've drilled 70, 80 feet in dense rock and haven't picked up much water, now there is water in the middle, but for the most part, just a small amount. They start looking for breaking out of the flow into the interflow contact, where the rocks are permeable, fractured, high porosity, and that's where they look for the water. The owner comes out and says, how much water did you hit? And the driller say, well, I went through an interflow zone and I only got about 2 or 3 gallons. You want me to go on? Well, how much farther we got to go? Well, at least another 100 feet. We'll pick up another interflow zone. The same principle when they drill the municipal wells in Moscow and Pullman area. The deeper you go, the more water you might get. And that's the principle in Pullman. Those wells are 700-800 feet deep, 450 feet through the water bearing zones. And the driller and the engineer will confer to whether we are flooded out, do we got enough water? If not, let's go on for another 100 feet. Now, the interesting part, it sounds pretty simple, but a lot of people have a hard time getting this, is that water flows downhill. So this diagram shows that when you tilt a sequence of basalt flows, the water moves in the direction of the tilt. Geologists call it dip, engineers might call it slope, but the tilt, and you don't have to tilt it much. An engineer friend of mine one time was the one that says, when I asked him about French drains, what was the engineering principle that you use? He looked at me strangely and goes, John, water moves downhill. If the French drain's not installed right, the water's not going to flow out away from the foundation in basalt sequences. The water moves down the dip of the rocks, and we'll use that principle here a couple of times. Excuse me for a second. You look at this, I broke it into 4 different structural blocks. They can be called areas, they can be called subbasins, whatever you like. But we're going to talk about the Koufax area, the Moscow-Pullman Basin area, the Palouse area, and Union Flat Creek, UFC, to the west of Pullman. Let's talk about those 4 blocks and how they relate to what we might call the Moscow-Pullman Basin. So let's talk about Moscow-Pullman Basin first. Now that definition stands in the literature because it's a geographic or a geologic name that is used to talk about rocks, of younger rocks surrounded by older rocks. And of course, you probably all know there, I'm probably talking to the choir, but the Moscow-Pullman area is surrounded, or mostly surrounded, by granites, quartzites, schists, and those are impermeable or nearly impermeable. So the area of the Moscow-Pullman Basin can be easily defined. Most people would draw the line, would draw their line across what we call the PBAC Butte area, across the 4 Mile Creek Little Gap, and then the large area between Albion and South Tiball Butte. In the Moscow-Pullman Basin, we don't have any argument with anybody, I don't think, that it belongs to what we would call the Palouse Basin aquifer system. All the wells all the lower aquifer wells in that area have the same water level. Contacts between flows are quite consistent. We used to have only data from the Pullman and Moscow pumping centers, but now there's been quite a few domestic wells the last 20 years drilled into the top 200, 250 feet of the Grand Ron all over the Moscow-Pullman Basin, and it consistently shows good interflow zones, horizontal basalts. You can trace sometimes you can trace them from well to well. So that's what I call one structural block, and we work from there. It's horizontal rocks and good aquifers. Nobody's going to argue with that. Now, when we go up north to Palouse, we only have one deep well in the lower aquifer. That's the city of Palouse. There's enough data in the upper aquifer to tell us that if the rocks are deformed, it's very small. So Palouse area, a little bit of a question mark, but probably has the same kind of subsurface structure as the Moscow-Pullman Basin. And of course, its hydrology does get involved with some controversy sometimes, but the big point is the water connected between Moscow-Pullman Basin and the Palouse Basin? Okay, I'm going way back 20 years when Dale Ralston reported that the well that they drilled for Palouse had the same water levels as those in Moscow-Pullman Basin. He checked old records, they were a bit sketchy, but it was very clear that the water decline curve in the Palouse well is the same as the Moscow-Pullman wells. So he concluded that the water has to be connected between Palouse and the Moscow-Pullman Basin. Again, in 2013, when they drilled an observation well, DOE drilled an observation well, what they call the PBAC Butte well, just above the 4 Mile Creek writing on your drawing, just at the southern end of the gap. He concluded the same thing and sent a memo, I believe, to PBAC, pointing out that the water level in the Butte Gap well is the same as it was in Palouse and the same as it was in Moscow-Pullman, and there must be a connection across there. So then follow that with Rick Conroy did some geology work comparing the Butte Gap well around and Sure enough, the basalt flow, upper Grand Ronde or lower aquifer flow in Palouse was the same as it was in the upper basalt flow of the Butte Gap well. I did some stratigraphic correlations. The rocks in the Butte Gap well match right across to the Palouse well. I mean, it's like from geological speaking, it's about like a lay-on. And then you add one more thing, one interesting fact, just a sideline here. The Palouse River once came over to the town of Palouse and turned south and went across that gap. The Paleo Palouse River, pre-basalt river, actually flowed not northwest as it presently does. It actually flowed through that gap and came down to Pullman before the basalts were in place. And that's why there's such a deep canyon of basalts in Pullman. You know, there's over 2,000 feet. Well, that was the Palouse River Canyon. Well, that river must have left some sediments or some way for water to get through the old channels. And then the geophysics have been done there a couple times. Some people have some different interpretations. Most recent is that the Grand Ronde rocks or the basalt's got to be at least 600 feet, so deep, thick. So I'm very confident that I don't know what the connection is, still don't know how good the connection is, but I don't see how the Palouse area can be left out of what we would call the Palouse Basin. Now we go west to UFC area. Look at the map there and see what you see on the stream patterns. There's an abrupt change when you get to Pullman. You have all these streams, 4 major streams, trying to flow east-west, trying to adjust after the basalts were in place. And even though the rocks are primarily loess covered, the streams reflect the subsurface basalt structure. They get to Pullman and man, they make a sharp northwest turn. The South Fork of the Palouse comes over to Pullman, picks up the Paradise Creek, picks up the Missouri Flat Creek, and they got northwest. If you look at the Union Flat Creek, they're going northwest. If you look down at the Snake River, they're going northwest. So that area, now it has a lot of folds, small ones, and possibly some faults, but the whole block is to the northwest. It's dipping to the northwest. And if you have any, some people always question, well, the dips are gentle. So what if it dips to northwest? That can't be affecting anything. Well, the evidence is the fact. A lot of people didn't believe it for a long time, but there's some reason the water doesn't go from Pullman to the Snake River. Snake River's got 1,400 feet of lower aquifer rocks exposed, no water coming out of it. That little bit of dip down at this along the Snake River is a slight dip to the northeast away from the Snake River, and then it joins this northwest block. That little bit of dip is changing that water flow. I believe very strongly in structural blocks. Now we go over to, we don't have any deep wells other than 3 observation wells. We have very little deep information from Union Flat Creek, so we don't know. It's got to be connected to Moscow Pullman Basin. I used to think it probably wasn't because of different structure, but there are 3 observation wells out there that show us that the water levels there pretty much match those in Moscow and Pullman. It still doesn't tell us, because we don't have any deep wells, is that connection large or is it small? Don't know. And then we go to the Koufax area, and let's see, the Koufax area, you can see now, look at its drainage. See, it's to the southwest. It's coming from the Palouse River, is flowing right down a very gentle syncline and right down a very gentle dip. I pointed out early in the first slide that the Grand Ronde, or the contacts in Alberton, drop 240 feet by the time they get to Koufax, and they're 240 feet below those in Pullman. So both Koufax and Union Flat Creek have that in common. The rocks have dropped down, were dropped down after they were in place. But the water, to me, is flowing southwest towards Koufax. Now, how do I know what makes me think that the water in Colfax is not connected to Pullman? Well, lots of geology and hydrological data. I think I listed 8 reasons in the paper. I remember a couple. When you look at the logs, we don't have deep chemistry. We don't know. I mean, deep rock chemistry, which we use to correlate flows. But we have a lot of wells over there that we know were in the Grand Ronde. The Grand Ronde there has totally different water characteristics as it does in the Moscow Pullman Basin. Some of the wells, 500-600 feet into the Grand Ronde, are nearly dry. You can see wells, you can look at 2 wells a mile or 2 apart, and one will have 20 gallons, the other have none. The contacts between the wells are very irregular, particularly on the east side, where we have a lot of east side of the Palouse River, where we have a lot of data. So to me, just geology-wise, it's okay, the water's moving to southwest, the Grand Ronde's different. So the only deep wells, well, we do have water coming to the surface at Glenwood Springs, but the only deep wells we have is in Colfax. They're nothing like the ones in Pullman. The maximum production out of those is about 600 or 700 gallons per minute. When, at least that's what was reported when they were first drilled. They got a water level that's 200 and some feet lower than the Pullman wells. What data we had got from these student theses was that when they ran massive pump tests, there wasn't any connection that they could notice. Of course, it's a long distance, so that may not mean anything, but they couldn't see any effects. The water decline records are much different than Moscow and Pullman, much smaller. The slopes between Albion and Colfax have been calculated along with those slope of water levels, and they indicate that the connection is either slow or none. Last fall, from a geology point of view, about 300 feet down in those wells, you go across really about a 30-foot gravel bed. It should have a lot of water. Gravel beds are the highest porosity permeability units you can find. So, and there's no water. If they cased that unit off, it would dry. So I just don't think the Colfax area is connected to the whole system. Different water levels, different structural blocks, different hydrological features. I gotta watch I don't get carried away here and keep talking. Okay, so we looked at the map that we proposed, and I have some question marks there by Albion. Steve and I went over that area quite a bit, trying to figure out where that line should go as you come out of the Union Flat Creek. The line here along the Snake River, as you see, is pretty straight and pretty well defined by the water levels. But trying to connect north to Albion was a little difficult because of the lack of data. So we drew the line in where best that we could think was between where the water levels started to drop in the lower aquifer system. So I put some question marks on there originally for the last slide or next to the last slide, just to point out that, you know, more data in the future might open that up a little more to the west, or it could be the drain area. But actually our model was tested a little bit. You probably can't see it on your screen, but just to the little bit to the southeast of the first question mark from on the northeast side, there's a little pink dot. Some of you might be able to see and some of you can't. What was interesting, after Steve and I drew the line, we looked at some old mapping done in 1980, and there was a piece of the Precambrian sticking up through the lush fields out there, which tells us that the present day South Fork of the Palouse is going in a canyon between that quartzite ridge and Albion. So it's just a smaller outcrop of the Smoot Hill, Kamiak Butte area. And our line was a little bit, I think Steve pointed out, maybe a half a mile, a little bit to the west. But I thought, wow, we drew a line right where it's going across or near to basement rocks that are coming near to the surface. So I feel pretty good about that line. Okay, at least it's nice to see it tested and find out to be pretty close. So our conclusions, the boundaries include known areas of the lower aquifer connections. That's what we use as our main boundary considerations. The boundary no longer includes those small areas I talked about. The proposed Palouse Basin, I think, is defendable as a groundwater basin. Maybe I didn't make the point enough, but a lot of people have asked me, what do you mean Palouse Basin? Is that a geologic basin? Is that a hydrological drainage basin? What is it? And it'd be nice to have it said, well, it's a hydrological basin, particularly groundwater basin for the lower aquifer system. I think that's much more defendable. And I prefer, that's just me, maybe I prefer having boundaries drawn where we know we have connections in areas where we know the pumping centers could be affecting them or they could be affecting us. So if there's new data that extends them out a little bit, I'd rather have a smaller map where I know we have the accuracy rather than larger. And you're going to have to expect adjustments. So there's always new data that comes in. I was amazed at how much PBAC supported and how much data came in the last, since 2007, really. I think there's something like 16 referee publications also come out of that from with the university's name on them. So I just think it was a really good thing. In fact, those papers helped in the thinking of the whole process. In another 10 years of paper, you might find some small adjustments. It's just to be expected. Before I end, I want to point out that Steve Robuchon helped me a lot. And if anything goes wrong with this and you don't like it, it's Steve's fault. And if you like the map and you use it, I get it. No, thank you.
All right, thank you, John. Very informative. I will open it up to the group and folks online if there are questions. Really, really informative. It would be the first thing that I would say, and I'll open it up if there are any.
Where exactly was the pink dot near Albion we were looking for?
Boy, yeah, you probably don't see it on your map, but on some of the, if you go a little bit, if you look at the scale, about a half mile southwest of the A on Albion. The reason I didn't pick it up so well, I guess, is I never finished it. It's over on the Colfax South.
Okay.
Quadrangle. Let me see, I use my pointer here, Pam.
There it is.
It's about in there.
Yep.
Somewhere. I can't even see it on mine. I know when I blow it up, I can. So there's a ridge in there, and even on the map where the people originally mapped it, and they were good mappers, it's just a little wee circle. But that means there's a hump out there of Precambrian rock that I had forgotten about over the years. I've never been to the site myself. I looked, from what I can tell, it's probably some farmer's field hill in which they found quartzite float on the hill. That's my guess.
Okay.
Thank you, that helps.
Yeah, very helpful. Other questions?
Yeah, Kara, this is Paul. Thank you, John. This is great stuff. Hey, Steve, did you do a square mile calculation on this different boundary? I always thought we were about were we around 500 square miles in the basin as per our existing boundary map?
I think that's pretty close. And I think this one is about half of that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Or maybe
Thanks.
even less than half. Yeah.
Okay.
Cut out half. Eileen, you have a comment?
Yeah, John and Steve and whoever else was involved in this is probably one of the most expertly and clearly written documents that I've encountered in working with a lot of different groups and activism groups and academic groups, but this is an absolutely amazing document. I would not hesitate to hand this to anyone And because I know they would understand it, and I know they would appreciate all the work that's been gone before it. This is truly something else. And you should be very proud of it. And I'm proud to be a part of this group because of this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I ditto those sentiments. I have a bit of a question, mostly because the research subcommittee has been kind of pondering the groundwater model piece. So when you look at this new proposed basin, and if you were to talk about, how you might model that from a groundwater model standpoint, are we still expecting like some crossing over this boundary, or is it more like a bathtub, or what are your thoughts on that?
I would think it's more like a bathtub, but there have to be some leaks somewhere. And that's, I guess I was modeling it. I'm not good at modeling, understand what they do in modeling, but I would model it once as a closed basin and then open up a potential drainage area somewhere. I'll put the arrow up there, somewhere across here. And see what different numbers I got. Whoops, I just did something to stop sharing. What did I do? I am lousy with the computer. I don't pay attention.
Oh, it says you are screen
It
sharing.
does say I am sharing. I just don't see my maps anymore. That's all. Do you hear me all right?
We can hear you.
Okay.
Oh,
that's
there it
fine
is.
then.
Showed back up.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, I think instead of modeling it as, I do both. It shouldn't take much extra, is to model it once as a closed system and then try to model it with some drainage area, because the water has to go somewhere. My suggestion from the structural maps, and I've written a rough draft on that, is that all the water from Colfax in Albion area is eventually trying to go to the southwest, because that's where the basalts go. Basalts dip and thicken towards the Pasco area. So I think that's where all the water is going, if there is water going down there, because that's what the basalts tell me. Now, this Union Flat Creek area is the hardest area to put in the model. Barker in 79, am I right, Steve? 79, yeah.
Yep.
That he modeled a lot of that area as a barrier zone. Well, it can't be entirely a barrier zone because we have similar water levels out there, but they would need to consider that structural area as holding the water back. I can't answer your question, but I have an interesting comment on that. Why does Pullman and Moscow have so darn much water? I know we always worry about our water levels going down, but it actually has a tremendous amount of water based on all the other areas that go around the basin, on the edges of the basin. So I would think you could almost model with a closed system and then see what go from there. I mean, I'm not a modeling expert. You should probably, Steve might have better comments than I would.
Okay. No, that's really helpful. Thank you.
David had a question, hand up earlier.
We have a from online. Oh, hold on a second here. It's open. Is there a hand up online? Maybe David, somebody had a question earlier? No. Okay. I actually have another question. Earlier on, you were talking about, or I guess several times you mentioned similar assumed water levels in the wells. And maybe this is a question more for Steve. At what point do you consider them similar? Like within 30 feet, 50 feet? Like what variability? And again, I'm thinking back to the modeling standpoint where we do see some variability, but I'm curious.
Well, any kind of difference in water levels is going to drive flow, but I think what's more important than the absolute levels, because they're difficult to measure well, is the trend over time. And so when you see the similar trends, they're all declining at basically the same rate. That would lead you to believe that they are behaving according to a similar aquifer system. And one of the issues we have is when we measure the depth to water to these wells all around the basin, we're measuring from a different elevation at each point. And we don't really have precise survey data that says the ground surface is exactly at 2,278.6 feet where you're measuring. So we might be plus or minus say as much as 20 feet when we measure any of those points. So our water levels really only have a certainty in a lot of these wells to plus or minus 20 feet. Now the newer wells we have surveyed in, and so we can kind of firm down the water levels in the newer wells because we have survey data, but for all the old information, we don't really have that good land surface information.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you, Steve.
Steve, could I interrupt? Isn't it though, in the areas that we have surveyed well and good data, aren't we talking inches in differences, not feet?
Between wells that are separated by a distance, I would say that it's probably feet, but it's not tens of feet. It's probably single feet. The measurement at any of the surveyed wells is very close. It's within inches. But
Yeah.
when you make the measurement, it's also influenced by atmospheric pressure. And the atmospheric pressure has a different influence on the aquifer depending upon the characteristics of the rock that's under there. So a high pressure ridge will make the water level change. A low pressure trough will make the water level change. And so there's up to like half a foot of variation that's just caused by the pressure in the atmosphere. And so you never can really get that precise when you do the measurements the way that we do them manually.
Great. Other questions for John, Steve? I do think under unfinished business later, we have basin boundary modifications again, and we may not have a quorum today to do anything, but we can talk about where we want to go after this presentation. But any more questions from the group?
I just love hearing John Bush speak about this. I could listen to him all day. It's really fun to hear the in-depth analysis. That really feels like we're getting it to inches.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you so much, John, Steve.
Yeah, I have one comment for Mark's story.
Yeah.
Mark, you're not looking that much younger than I am. What's going on there? Mark and I go way back. Mark and I go back 50 years, I think. So I just wanted to say hi.
Thanks, John. The white hair is good, but I'm still coming, so I'm pretty happy.
Okay. It's good to see you.
Still kicking it. Did you have a question, Jean? No?
I do.
Did you want to ask it?
Yes, I do. I apologize if I'm revealing my ignorance, but I probably will. Last meeting, we were talking about, I believe they were called paleo channels between the upper aquifer and the lower aquifer, and the significance of, forget the name of the type of formation of the ground and how the water could penetrate down to the lower aquifer from this water in the upper aquifer through these paleo channels. Did I just understand that Mr. Bush was saying there was not much transfer between the layers? And connected to that, why are we excluding the upper aquifer from the boundary? And would that upper aquifer be larger than the lower aquifer? What's the rationale between excluding the upper aquifer, since it does supply water to, seems like we need to have a very complicated solution to a very complicated problem. And I don't know if I even expressed myself very well, but can you clarify any of that?
Some of it, yes. The upper aquifer throughout the basin is very disconnected, and it's not a even supplier. Moscow is practically the only area that can use the upper aquifer, and its capacity has been well documented for 100 years. And that's just in Moscow. And if they pump that at full capacity, it would supply only less than 10% of the entire basin. The other areas, most of the upper aquifer, the wells are very small, small quantity. Some of them are actually do not pump any water at all. Most of the upper aquifer wells between Moscow and Pullman are incapable of pumping over 5 gallons a minute. So that's why, that was one of the reasons why I excluded it. They're not well interconnected. In other words, the water in the Moscow upper aquifer system is there because of an extreme thickness of the sediments, but they're not connected to the upper aquifer in Pullman. Now, your other question, I don't, these paleo channels, the people doing research on the Moscow Mountain area have been looking, they've documented that there's recharge occurring along the mountain front. And how does the water get down into the aquifer systems? And they use there's old paleo channels of sand that were deposited during several volcanic events, and they're stacked on top of each other. And even though the fields show, if you look in the fields, look like they're all clay, have noted that there's a tremendous amount of water that does get down through some of that into channels. And then those channels collect and supply water both to the upper aquifer in Moscow and to the lower aquifer. Probably the same thing may occur outside of from down through Viola. It is true that the upper aquifer can leak, what we call leak. The water level difference between the two aquifers is close to 200 feet in some areas. So they respond totally differently. But it is true that the upper aquifer leaks a little bit, and it could be providing some recharge to the lower aquifer. Most calculations I've seen, and I am not good at my mathematics are done on a Walmart calculator, but what I've read from the experts is that we're talking a very small amount that leaks from the upper aquifer to the lower aquifer. So those were my reasons on whether they were the best ones or not, that I did not include the upper aquifer in my thinking. I don't know if that answers the question about the paleo channels. Once you get away from the edges of the mountain fronts, the paleo channels decrease because the basalts are stacked right on top of each other with very little sediment. There's one layer over in Pullman, which may at 700 feet in depth, which may represent the old Paleo Palouse River. But the channels coming off the mountains that the recharge people were talking about, they thin and pinch out about the state line. Is about where they pinch out as you go west. So they play a big role in recharge, probably not a large role in terms of the lower aquifer system. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Yeah, you obviously know about it and you addressed it.
Yeah.
Was that called alluvial? What was the name of that type of soil?
Well, that's alluvial, gravels and sands. Every time a basalt flow flowed into the area from the west, it would make sort of like artificially dam. It would dam up the streams, and sediments coming off of Moscow Mountain, for example, would get deposited in reworking streams. And then the next flow would come and it would go over the top of those sediments. So they're alluvial sediments, yeah, sands, gravels, some clays.
Very interesting.
Right. John, this is Mark. I have, maybe it's just not even a very fair question, but with this new boundary that you've identified, could the geology be used to identify an area outside of the basin where water could be pumped from the ground, where it might be recharging better than it is inside the basin, and have a more long-term water supply with groundwater I don't even know if the state law would be pertaining to pumping water outside a city that's using it, but if you get up northwest of Albion, you might be able to put in a well and have a more sustainable water supply that's not connected to and not decreasing the levels inside the basin. Is that a possibility from a result of the geologic mapping?
Well, just a thought. I don't know. I've recently looked at your, looked over the data from the Glenwood Springs wells.
Yes.
And I don't have a positive sense. I have a little bit of field work I need to do, which I may never get to, but I'm pretty convinced that the Palouse River is recharging the upper Grand Ronde from Elberton to Glenwood Springs. There's a large meandering belt in there that's right on top of the flow top of the upper Grand Ronde and near the interflow boundary between the Wanapum and Grand Ronde. So in my mind, you'd have to go up that far. The reason I'm not so sure about along the South Fork between Albion and Colfax is that most of the wells there are very erratic, and I don't see a pattern. I'd be nervous in putting in a well in that area. Union Flat Creek is closer and be better. The problem is, my thinking, geology-wise, is that those wells is not going to be as productive as Pullman. We won't know that ever until somebody out in Union Flat Creek or someplace between Albion and Colfax actually drills a deep well. It's just an unknown to what the production level is. So yeah, there's a possibility out there, but I wouldn't know where to look.
Like I said, it wasn't really a fair question, but I'm
That's
just
all right.
trying to think outside the box.
Yeah, that's what makes us think, you know.
Yeah. Okay, great. And I think, John, when you asked that question, Jean, I think, John, you actually said this in there a little bit, that it's important to, you know, as we push this out or communicate it or use this moving forward to remind, I think it was important, you said it several times, that this was based off the lower aquifer system and, you know, that it's a groundwater basin and because that can be confusing for people, I think. So, so you said that, and even as we put figures out there, we could have footnotes to that effect to prevent confusion, I guess. Any other questions, comments? One more, Jean? Yeah, go ahead.
I should have said Dr. Bush instead of Mr. Bush. I'm
No,
sorry.
that's all right. I don't care.
Well, we do really appreciate it very much, and you putting this together tremendously and coming to talk with us today. I think many folks said that. I'm getting a lot of head nods here in the room too. So
thank you.
Thank you tremendously.
Okay, thank you, guys. See you later.
Great. And we'll move on to our unfinished business portion. We will jump back to the basin boundary modifications here and next steps. But our next piece is the item associated with the executive director position. I'll give a quick update on where we're at with that. So since we last met, we had 2 rounds of interviews. Several of the folks from PBAC were involved with. After the second set of interviews, we had somewhat of a finalist reception. So I want to thank everybody that attended that, helped organize it, helped plan it. So we had folks there to meet with a few of those and provide input. The committee did regroup shortly thereafter and did decide to extend a formal offer to Saline Accord. She is the current planning manager for the city of Boise. And U of I has been doing a fabulous job of leading the charge from there and working through all the ropes on the U of I side, but we are happy to announce that she has accepted the position, and I believe we'll be starting middle of July. PBAC will look at making a formal announcement. She's still working through a few things on her end and making announcements there, so we want to make the announcement to this group here, but you know, ask that people don't push that out to media or anybody at this point. But we are very pleased. I think she's going to be a great leader, help PBAC figure out what our next steps are going to be. I, for one, am super excited to get her started. I know she'll hit the ground running. Any other comments from the hiring committee around that?
I would just mirror that. I think the entire hiring committee was pretty excited about extending an offer to her. So,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, and again, thank you to everybody that was involved with that, U of I especially. It was quite the process. Brian and Rusty have been pushing really hard and did a lot of work on that. And so thank you guys. Kudos to you tremendously. I'd say 6 months is a pretty good turnaround for PBAC to get somebody hired. So thanks for everybody involved with that.
Kara, I attended the meet and greet for the candidates and met Celine, and I think she'll do a terrific job. Thanks for making that possible.
Yeah, thank you as well,
Yeah,
Tom.
and thanks to the hiring committee for closing that whole loop. I think that was a great pick.
Yeah, I anticipate we'll see Celine. She may or may not be able to join the next meeting remotely, but starting July 11th, I anticipate we'll all see her in July. So that'll be very exciting. And yeah, I'm just really pleased to be able to make that announcement. We'll move back to the basin boundary modification. So I don't see any Moscow folks here today, and we can also have a discussion around what PBAC actually needs to do. I truthfully don't know if we need to formally adopt the new basin. I would open it up for discussion to the committee. I'm personally in support of finding a way to push this and start using this in our new literature. And I think Eileen said it really well. We have a great written document and justification to support it, a lot of sound research and data to back it up. And so, yeah, I guess I would open it up to what next steps might be from the committee. At one point I had talked about, the research or the communications subcommittees doing some work, but we can also probably hash some things out here as a group collectively as well. Sounds to me like, I don't know that there's a lot of discussion around the technical side. I think they've put that all in here very well. Mark has a comment, which I will take.
When we started talking about this many months ago, I think we kind of realized that we never really even adopted the boundary that we consider the boundary now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably led to some confusion, or at least maybe not some clarity.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're probably would be in better shape if we do adopt it, even if we call it an interim or a suspected boundary or something like that, more than just
projected.
Here's what happens to show up on the slides at the annual conference,
Our current understanding.
Yeah.
Or date it. I don't care. I think we're better off adopting something than not adopting it.
I think that's a great suggestion. And when this started and I was thinking about it, I remember reaching out to Steve and saying, where did that basin boundary that we see on all our figures come from anyways? And I think you're right, came out of some research, and
it just started showing up because a lot of people were showing it. I think it was the way I think Steve finally concluded. Right. So Steve can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of what we came up with. And I just think we need to do better than that.
Okay.
We need to control the information moving forward, especially as we go to roll out our alternatives. People need to be able to go to the website and say, this is it. As much as
this is what we think it is.
Right, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, people need to have that.
Yes,
have
well,
that,
along those
assurance.
lines, if we do formally adopt this as our best estimate on the boundary, then I think we had to follow that up with some sort of press release, just saying, this is what we think.
Yeah.
The best information we have is, and
I think we should call it the bush boundary.
I like that as well. He's not on the call to defend that anymore, but well, certainly I think his name would be up there on it. Or, if it goes south, it's the Robichon boundary.
There you go.
Right.
No, I think that's great discussion. I think one of the big change. Go ahead. Oops.
We can always blame Steve for anything.
He's far enough away.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I don't know if that's fair.
So should we consider that as an agenda item for next time to formally adopt that? Because I'm not sure where we are in terms of quorum today.
I think you'd want everybody involved, at least one representative from each entity. And Moscow's not really present today. I think we need to make sure they're part of it.
So let's just get it on the agenda and
Put
see.
it on the agenda.
I agree. Go ahead.
I guess my question is, when we adopt the boundary, are we adopting like a a general sort of picture image, or are we actually like putting in, you know, like legal boundaries with meets and bounds, and like how are we're just sort of accepting a general concept?
I think you're
what
second.
John presented is what we would adopt. That meets and bounds would be silly at this point.
Yep, exactly. So we're just looking at just the general concept of what he presented as the thing to consider adopting. Okay, thank you.
We could probably even adopt his paper if we wanted to as the explanation thereof.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
that idea.
Along with the paper and the proposal.
So next meeting agenda item.
Yep.
Thanks.
And we can ask the Moscow folks to go back and rewatch today's, the presentation,
Sure.
assuming they want to have that background piece associated with it. I guess previously, I'm looking at the current one. I mean, we're obviously taking Colfax out. I guess Palouse, were they technically in that before? They were technically in that boundary and they still are in that boundary.
Yes.
Okay, just we've now cut out a large portion of it. Okay. Paul Kimmel, as our communications subcommittee, do you feel a need to assign some work to the communications subcommittee in the interim to think about what a press release or something might look like associated around that? Or you're just so good you can handle it all on your own?
I can work with the technical advisor and put some messaging out there. We'll try and have something maybe prepared for the June meeting. How's that?
Okay. And I liked your question at the beginning too, Paul, about, the area that we've taken out from here and a few fun facts and numbers associated around that. Personally, I like the dash boundary here because it implies uncertainty instead of, definitive.
Yeah, I think, I can't remember if it was Eileen, but yeah, this is a groundwater basin boundary. It's not the Palouse River Basin drainage boundary. It's a groundwater basin boundary. So I think that's an important distinction.
Okay.
There's probably a distinction there too, that if you're 6 feet outside that boundary, it doesn't mean that you're somehow not inclusive to this conversation,
Yeah.
Or
Yeah,
6 feet.
and also, I mean, this is not a legal boundary. This is just a working boundary for scientific and groundwater management purposes. So
Correct.
Yeah. And I think we ought to, and this will help when we get our new executive director on, but, post this on our website. I know we have some figures and things on the website that are going to have that old version. So I think as a part of that, it would be very important that we kind of go over the website and some of the messaging that's out there. And then all of us just in technical work moving forward, we likely won't be able to put it. Well, I guess we can talk about if we can incorporate that at all into Alta's work or report, but moving forward, we'll want to make sure that figures and things are defining that more appropriately.
I think it might be something nice to talk about a little bit more at the groundwater at the summit in October as well.
Oh, that's a great
Definitely.
suggestion.
Because I think if you spent 15 or 20 minutes on that, whomever that might be, that I think would help get the message out.
I think we get a good audience from that group that sometimes we don't get as much here. So that would be on people's minds. That's a great
And
suggestion.
it gives us a chance to illuminate all the hard work that's gone into it,
Right.
which is in terms of communications and getting the message out. That's almost more important because I've said it in this group many times. The comment I get most of the time is nobody's doing anything.
Right.
And yeah,
Not true.
not true.
There's always things happening, that are always interesting or definitive.
Okay, well, we'll return at the next meeting with something, Paul and Steve too, as you can work with me as well to see, what maybe we want to present for that. We can certainly figure that out, and I'll put a bug in Moscow's ear as well. So yeah, good
Kara,
discussion.
if I might, can I ask a quick question on that? How does that affect the model results that WSU is doing?
I would surmise that that's still too soon to tell. We had a conversation with
Nick at WCU yesterday,
2 days.
2 days ago, earlier this week. And I think we're trying to determine what next steps. I think we tossed around some ideas of how to make the most of the effort we've put in to date. I think we both shared some frustration with both data gaps and the functionality of the model, and we're still working on how best to make the most of that effort. So stay tuned, and
Yeah.
The research committee, I think, is still working on that effort.
Yeah, perhaps in hindsight, this effort would have been valuable to have done before that.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that, where that model's at, yeah, we can talk about it a little bit more, as I think Jeff answered that really quite well. And it's a great question. And that's why I had the model in my mind was when I was asking John some of the questions, because there was a lot of discussion around boundary conditions. I think maybe even more so than the boundary itself in the model, and uncertainties associated with where water leaves the system or does not. So, this certainly could have fed into that some, but there's some, I think, bigger picture discussions where even with this, the model may not have turned out much different, I think, than where it is presently. So any other questions on basin boundary modifications until we bring it back to the committee next month?
Kara, this is Steve. I have a comment.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many people who live in Palouse know that they're part of this Moscow-Pullman problem. And I really think communication should begin as soon as possible with the people that can spread the word in Palouse. And you might even be thinking about formal membership in PBAC for Palouse. If they're part of the problem and part of the solution, maybe they should be sitting at the table. And it seems like now is a good time to start having those conversations, so it doesn't just get dropped on people who show up at the water summit and say, whoa, what's going on?
Wait a second. Yeah, that's a very valid point. Yeah. I'm also seeing a lot of head nods here in regards to that. Yeah, it's a good chunk for sure. I don't think it's interesting. I'm not sure. I got the impression we didn't know which way water would be moving either between that gap. So it seemed like it could be somewhat variable. So yeah, we should definitely start talking about that. I know before Corey departed us, she had some funds to do conservation messaging out to Whitman County. Well, all the counties in the basin in that area, and Latah County has also, potentially designated some funds to help with the rural areas in Latah County as well. So I think pushing to these rural areas is going to pick up. I mean, I think, and then actually having some direct discussions as well, as you've suggested, Steve, would be a good suggestion. We could certainly reach out and should reach out and figure out what that maybe looks like. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to subcommittee reports. Yeah, go ahead.
Do the appropriate people in Colfax know that they've shifted out of the
in
boundary
Colfax
into the new groundwater basin?
Probably not, but I don't think we've had a lot of interest, or I don't know, maybe Mark can speak to it better than I can.
Yeah, Paul and I sort of watched this unfold a bunch of years. Colfax kind of pulled themselves out of interest in the PBAC efforts 5 or 8 or 10 years ago, whatever it was.
You might want to know officially.
I think that you're right. We probably should message Colfax just as much as we're messaging Palouse.
Yeah.
But they pulled out for budgetary reasons and other reasons internal to Colfax. I'd be happy to help bring that message to them if you want.
Okay. And that maybe
I work across the street from them, so.
Well, that makes sense. Actually, I think we'd very much rely on you for that, Mark. Would be a great suggestion.
Go to a council meeting or something and just let them know what's going on.
Okay.
That'd be helpful.
Anyone in the group have thoughts on a good contact with Palouse, or who our best point might be there? Paul does.
I can help with that.
Okay. That would be great. I can support as needed. both of you in that effort. Okay, thank you. That was a great question, by the way. Subcommittee reports. Rusty just stepped out of the room, but I'm fairly confident we don't really have a budget report update at this point. When we get our executive director on in the early parts of that, I know she'll be diving into that piece and starting that process back up. Paul, communications update.
Sure, thank you, Kara. I believe Robin's in the room, and I think our last outreach event was with the Whitman County Realtors a few weeks ago. Same messaging. I'm not sure if Robin, you have any feedback from that presentation. And then also today, Kara, Robin, and myself presented to the Idaho Water Resource Board, just an update on the work, a little bit about our 2021 pumping. Robin shared a little bit about the progress of the alternative water supply study, and then Kara closed us with kind of the near-term next steps. I thought it was really well received. I got a couple emails already from some of the water resource planning staff and thanking us for a great presentation. So I'm not aware of any other outreach efforts. Social media, Ashley is still pushing out on her weekly schedule, Twitter, Instagram, and some Facebook posts. So that messaging continues out too.
Right. Great. Thank you, Paul.
Mhm.
Yeah, go ahead.
It may or may not be part of this. When are we going to announce our new executive director? Is that part of the communication efforts?
Well, that may be part of the communication efforts. It may be as early as next week. But there's just a few logistics on that end. We just want to get clarification. Yeah, I would think between now and our next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, Kara, I'll get a press release, a draft of that here in the next few days and have that ready. We'll run it by Celine and make sure she's comfortable with it. And yeah, that'll be our next press release. So, and I would assume could happen sometime late next week.
Yeah. Yep. And there'll be some continued work still a little bit with the committee, and maybe we'll reach out to others as well as we work through, where Celine's office is going to be. We may need to move from where the previous facility was. So still some things to do on that end. So some of you may be hearing from me for pleas of help. Yeah. Okay. Research, it got touched on.
Can we hear from Robin about her presentation?
I'm coming up. I can.
Oh, I thought we were there. I'm sorry.
Well, either way, we do have a bullet item for alternative water supply
never mind.
project.
We'll
Get there, I think, when we get there.
Sure she doesn't get forgotten. Yeah.
Oh, we would never forget Robin, I don't think. Research, we touched on it a little bit. Sean, anything else to add?
Sure. Just what Jeff had said earlier. Jeff, Tim, Kara, and I had met with Professor Engdahl on Tuesday, and really wanted to pick his brain on his thoughts on the model. He'd given us a pretty good summary that I'd shared with the group on what the limitations of the model are and how we could use it, and to provide an overall summary of that. He basically told us it's not a good predictive model at this point. So the discussion that we need to have with the research subcommittee is, what does that look like? Do we try to make another investment in the model to get that to a point that we can have a good predictive model? Is there value in that, or do we essentially try to focus our efforts and our resources on water supply alternatives? So there's quite a discussion to be had on that, and I anticipate coming out of the discussion that will happen with the research subcommittee that will bring a good summary to the group on that, and some recommendations, but quite a few unknowns at this point.
Yeah. Yep. That sounds about right from my recollection as well. Okay, well, any other questions on subcommittees? I might have glanced over. Okay, we'll move on to other reports and announcements, starting with our wonderful Robin and our alternative water supply project.
Okay, so the project's been going very well. As Paul mentioned, we've done a couple of outreach activities. So I think we also did the Pullman League of Women Voters since the last PBAC meeting. So that went really good, had some good questions. Paul and I tag teamed that one. And then the Whitman County Association of Realtors, Eileen was there, and I think that went really well. It was really well received, and because they're really the front lines, right? When people are coming, they're moving into the area, they're getting a new house. What can they do? You know, some people are coming from the east, and there's gobs of water, and so they were interested in the Y-scape guidebook, and we could tell them where to find that, and so that was pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think there was 22 people there.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
Let's see what else. Yep, the Idaho Water Resource Board meeting today, and then we submitted the draft report to PBAC on Monday. So
it went out to the full committee Tuesday.
Okay.
Steve,
it was Monday
sent that
night
out
when I sent it. Yeah.
Yeah. You were hardworking. I think it came in after hours, but so everybody should have seen that come to their inbox. Our intended next steps on that is to really ask everybody to sit down and read that. Share it with leaders and other representatives from your entities who may be interested in it. Critique it, think through it. The plan would be to try and put together a workshop sometime in July with all of us, where we can really start to hash through that. We can certainly, there'll be an opportunity. You requested comments by
June 6th.
By June 6th. So we likely won't have the PBAC workshop before that, but I would ask people to dive into that and make sure that they don't have comments, or if they do, that to send those to Robin or Steve or myself, and we'll get them off to Robin. And with the intent being that we will have a very involved, in-depth workshop, so we can really start talking through some of the recommendations and the next steps and the decision points that are in that report. I haven't had a chance to dive into the report real closely, but there are some recommendations and things from Alta Science and Engineering, and following up to the IDWR meeting this morning, they had a lot of questions that I thought were really good, and people are very interested. So thank you, Robin, for your team for preparing that report. Please, everybody look at it sooner rather than later. Spend some time diving into that. I don't know that we sent out the version with the appendices. Is there a way we can get that out, Steve? I know the files are kind of big.
I think he could just forward the email with the link.
Okay.
It's on the Google Drive, so.
You think if he forwards that, it would stay there?
Click on it and download it, yeah.
Okay. And I know, let me see, so I don't scare people away.
I just have two more things. One is, but our plan is that once we get comments, we'll update the report, but we won't finalize it until after the workshop. Because I'm thinking some things will come from that workshop, and then we'll have a good chunk of June to do the updates, but then we'll finalize it after that workshop. And then one thing too with the Water Resource Board, they're acknowledging the amount of ARPA funds that are available and the need to spend them by 2026. So it's just kind of a good, I think PBAC has a really good momentum with this, but just that keeping it moving forward is going to be important.
I have the end of the report text. It's 34 pages. That's not that much. Everybody can read the 34 pages and dive into the appendices as makes sense. So the main part of the text is not 500 pages or something. It's not daunting. So make sure to take a look at that. In the meantime too, I'll work maybe with Steve or Paul or somebody. We'll try and put out maybe a what's the right word, Survey Monkey or some sort of poll or something to figure out when people would be available. I think the earlier we get that on our calendars, the better. I presume people tend to like the 1 to 5 time frame. Does that seem to work well for people, just in general? Okay, we can try and stick with something along those lines, but really important to keep the momentum going and come together and really have some good discussions. Not let the effort just fall by the wayside. So great.
Hey, Kara.
Yeah.
I think David Dalby has a question. I think he has his hand raised.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. You said that the draft report was available. Is that for public or is that just for members of PBAC and the committees?
I think at this point, it's just for the committee, but certainly when we get it finalized, we'll look to push that out to the greater public.
So it won't be public until you actually have the final report then?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. As
That's perfect. Thank you.
this point, Mark's giving me a look like maybe we ought to do it differently. I'm open to discussion.
I know what the county would say, but this isn't the county, is that if it's there, it's public.
Yeah.
But so I have no problem sharing a draft, anything once you've
Either
got
way,
it
well,
in
I'm
general
fine with it.
circulation.
What do folks think? We
Hey,
could,
Kara,
I mean,
I want to make sure we set proper expectations for public feedback
Yes.
as well. That, you know, if Mr. Dalby, for instance, has questions, where do those questions go? And what's that feedback look like? I want to be respectful of their questions as well and what that might look like. We really don't have a process set up for that yet. And I don't know. I mean, that's I'm not sure if we built that into the scope of work with Alta either. So I guess that's my question.
I would think that we're not really accepting feedback until we meet about it. You know, sharing something is different than accepting feedback.
Okay.
How I would look at it is once we have the workshop, then I think we need to start accepting feedback because we're then at a phase of accepting public input.
right.
Okay.
And I would make a suggestion there, and that would be at some point to go out with a fairly large scale public outreach campaign associated with this. I think this has some pretty far reaching effects, and given some of the history on, you know, if you look way back in PBAC into the 50s, you know, I think that public outreach piece is going to be really important. So it may be something where we want to start developing with Alta, you know, that kind of a campaign and get, you know, communication specialist on board just to message that out.
It's a great suggestion.
Yes.
Okay.
There's some new legislation in Washington that may lean on that too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So do we want to just, someone that asks for access to the draft report?
We're
we can
willing
give
to
them
share
access,
it too.
but we need probably a more formal process by how we're gonna, or think about the process by which we're going to accept feedback.
Correct. And I guess Robin could probably speak to this a little bit more as well. I mean, there's nothing in here that says we're doing this alternative. This is what we're moving forward with. So there's a lot of good information that's gone into the report and has some recommendations moving forward. One of them is developing an implementation plan, you know, deciding, you know, what the governance looks like moving forward, talking about funding. So by no means is even this report being finalized necessarily setting in stone, we're doing this, we're doing that. There's going to need to be a very large effort and movement around the public outreach, as Sean suggested. So,
some huge unknowns.
so please don't think that there's a definitive, you know, we're doing this and this is what we're doing. So did you have something to add, Jeff?
Nope.
Okay, I thought I saw your hand up. So, so I'm hearing maybe folks that are interested in getting a version of that could reach out to myself or Steve Robichon, and we can certainly share that report out. We don't have a great mechanism for feedback at this point, but we will be looking for that in the future as well. And as PBAC has a workshop and works through it internally more as well. Excellent discussion. Thank you, everybody. Anything else on the alternative water supply project?
This is Steve. I guess I have a question or a comment.
Yeah.
When I put the minutes out, I'm going to point to the video, and the video is going to point to this update, and anybody that looks at it is going to know that there's a draft out there and it's available. So it seems like if you just, maybe Paul had Ashley posted to the website on that main page. If somebody went to the website and found it, they could read it. If somebody were interested, they could go to the website and read it. Otherwise, you're not making a formal thing out of it, but it's out there for anybody that's interested.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, it needs to be circulated. The public needs to be able to see it. The public needs to be able to comment. My only concern is to make sure that we've, you know, checked all the typos and make sure that that stuff is done before we post it up there. But it definitely needs to be out so that people can make substantive comments or ask substantive questions about the intention of the alternative water supply options and how they should be implemented. So definitely the substance of it needs to be accessible to the public. And I'm not suggesting we have any typos. I'm just saying, I just want to make sure that it's clean before we post it out for people to review.
Dang clean.
Well, Debbie looked over.
Yeah,
it.
it's
I guess
pretty
I'd push that to, I mean, I think Alta has a fairly, good quality control, but it's their draft. And we can put draft and some disclaimers associated with that.
Absolutely, right. But the whole process is a public process and we need to make sure that everybody's involved.
I guess that then makes me wonder if we need to have that opportunity for comment associated with it.
Not until we're ready. Not
until
until
we're
we have
ready.
something set up that we can, because otherwise we lose people. Then they'll say, well, I made a comment, but where did it go? Nobody heard it.
Now, how about if we do this? Yeah, we can certainly post it, absolutely. And we can have some sort of just a statement with that, that public comments will likely commence at a certain date or after a certain date. That way it gives us time as a committee to do the workshop and kind of figure out, okay, we'll have an implementation plan, as well as that, as Sean suggested, a more defined outreach and engagement around the study. I think I agree totally. Like I said, I just don't want to set people up for expectations when they start sending emails in. I want to make sure we can respond to those at the appropriate time.
I like Paul's suggestion. We need to make sure we're not losing track of people's really good comments and suggestions and so forth. And we need to be able to make sure that it's a productive exercise for everybody involved.
Yeah, one of the things we're going to do too is we'll get this in front of the stakeholder engagement group as a draft as well. And we'll make sure we define what that looks like. But we'll also look to them to help us once we open up that public feedback loop.
And maybe, Steve, the way to do this would be to attach the draft report to the minutes.
There you go.
That's a good idea.
Expedient.
Okay. Attach them to the
I'm fine with
minutes.
that. I just, if somebody wants it, it's
Make it
now a
available.
public document and Washington law is pretty clear.
Works for me. Works for me. All right, y'all keep me in line. Just kidding.
It's a moving target.
We collectively keep each other in line. It's good. All right. Well, perfect. Well, thank you all for the good discussion. We will move forward with that approach. Keep an eye out for an email about setting some sort of workshop date. Sooner we can get that on our calendars, of course, the better. Okay, I do have a bullet item for NSF Civic Planning Grant Proposal Letter of Support. I don't know. Oh, I do see Tim on the line, and I don't know that there's too much to update since last time, but I'll open it up to you, Tim.
Yeah, that's really easy. Thanks for doing the letter. We basically, finalized it, integrated it into the document, and now we're in the holding pattern. And hopefully we'll hear something from NSF by maybe September, whether that goes forward as a full planning grant.
Great. Okay. All right. Let's see. I guess that's the last thing that we technically have on our agenda here. Our next PBAC meeting will be Thursday, June 16th. 2022, 2:00 p.m., presumably in this very room, but we'll confirm that with the agenda that goes out roughly Monday before that meeting. Trying to think what other notes. I guess I'll open it up for good of the order if anyone has anything to add. We've actually had a fairly long meeting today, so thank you all for coming today.
Kara, I have a couple more. Steve.
All right, go ahead.
At the June meeting, traditionally, officer elections are held and the committee determines whether and how much to assess member entities for the next fiscal year. So those two things will probably be on the agenda next month unless somebody decides otherwise.
I'm guessing that makes sense. to continue with. So hopefully I think with that, we'll need a quorum. So I'll do some chatting on my end to hopefully make sure we have at least one representative from each of the entities. I think this is the first time in a while we haven't actually had everybody. So thank you, Steve. Anything else to add? No? Okay.
Kara, just a heads up, I'm having some conversations with a potential keynote for the water summit. We will target October. I think it serves our best interest to make sure we really focus on the alternative water supply report in that too. So any other ideas or topics, start thinking about them and get them coming my way.
Okay, great suggestion.
I just had a quick question too, since we were mentioning the keynote. Paul, you were mentioning maybe having a workshop with is it Amy Vickers, who was the keynote last year? Is that still potentially going to happen?
I'm not sure. I need to circle back with Sean. I got the sense from a conversation that maybe we weren't quite ready for that, but I'm certainly open, and she was certainly willing to. So I wanted to make sure it fits within the cadence of both the city of Pullman and Moscow, where they are with their water conservation plans, and is this the right time to bring her back, I guess.
Great, thanks.
Okay. All right.
There's a hand.
Another hand. Do I have a hand? Ooh, I didn't see
I think
one.
it's your pointer.
Oh, I do it really. Yeah, it is. For some reason, I'm not great at paying attention to the virtual world. So thank you for everybody for keeping me in tune. I guess I'd take a motion to.
One thing,
Sure.
I was just curious why the push to get the Alpha report out and opposite for the basin boundary. It's been months and months and months that you've been looking at the basin boundary and say we can't let anybody know about that. But you decided
Well, I'm
that
not
everybody should know about
sure.
Alpha because it's public meetings and everything.
I'm not sure we're not informing anybody of the basin boundary. I mean, it's all available on these minutes and those things are all out here.
I was told before that I wasn't to post anything or report anything about the new basin boundary with Co-op News or anything, and they're very hesitant to let me do any.
I mean, I think we're just trying to be cognizant about how we roll it out is the big picture, but it's certainly, these meetings are open to the public and here we are discussing them in front of everybody. So I guess that would be my comment towards that. So
I'd say we should just post that to our website
as
too,
well,
at this point.
the report.
The report, yeah.
Okay. Or attach it to the minutes. Let's just attach it to the minutes because
Like I
we
say, and we
just
have
had a big discussion about
We
it.
have the luxury of having an excellent report.
Yeah.
Very readable by the guide away.
I didn't see anything concerning with it that needed to be revised or modified.
I think that's
So,
me.
all right.
That's what Wally Friel always used to say.
Yeah.
Well-
Hand it to a guide away t-shirt if you can understand it, you're there.
We'll start having some very long minutes. But we'll go ahead and
So
attach that as well.
This is
Yeah.
Steve again. I guess I have a question now
Go
about,
ahead.
well, I'm forgetting what it was, but it was an important question about the boundaries. Did you actually make a decision as a group to do anything about the boundaries? I didn't catch any motions or
Yep.
decisions to adopt or anything. Did that happen?
So Steve, we don't have a quorum today. And so I think
Okay.
the discussion was we would bring it back to the table next
It's still
meeting.
just a draft.
Still
Okay,
just a draft.
okay.
Correct. Excellent clarification. Okay, with that, I would take motions to adjourn. Anyone?
So moved.
So moved by Mark. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Jeff. All right. All those in favor of adjourning for the day, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone want to stick around? That's a no.
It's a sales
Okay.
pitch.
All right,
Yeah, we
we'll
tapped
call
the
the meeting
cake, yeah.
formally to a close. Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Tap that cake, yeah.